let's start this way. Put your hand up if you have heard of NeuroLeadership and you think you understand something about the topic. You don't count, Steph? Alistair? Okay, one or two hands other than our team. And that's interesting. I'll make a bold statement, and that is that I believe that if we all got back together here in 5 years' time and I asked you the same question, and if I added the rider and are using it on a day-to-day basis, every hand would go up. It is a burgeoning area of study in our field. We're all in the people business. It's a burgeoning area of study, knowledge and application in our field. I'm going to do 3 simple things today. We haven't got a lot of time. We'll do 3 simple things. Firstly, I'll explain to you a little bit about why I think this is so important. So, a little bit of the evangelist to start with, because I'd like to get you interested. Secondly, I'll give you a couple of areas of the actual science and explain them. Only 2 big words and they won't be too difficult. It'll be quite user-friendly. Just to take you through a couple of areas, a light skim across the top to explain how neuroscience can be applied to leadership. And finally, with due deference to my friend John, we will then apply it to something very, very practical, to something that you do every day. We will apply those 2 items that we talked about from the science to day-to-day. But some of you know John actually came down from the lofty heights of HRD and worked with the Alphaeight Institute for 12 months before going back up to the lofty heights of HRD. And he was a great colleague, and to his credit, and I think to ours, we've remained good friends. But one thing John brought to us, and he would hammer us on this, I have to tell you. Every time we were preparing for a workshop with a client, he would say, where are the practical takeaways? What are they going to get out of it? Practical. You already used that word once today. Yeah. So I assure you, John, there will be practical takeaways. What's NeuroLeadership? Well, it's the neuroscience of leadership. It's applying brain science to life, to where we live, particularly as people in business. Brain science is very exciting. It tells us a lot about people's behaviour. Behavioural change is what training is all about. Science sometimes takes a while to cross over into the real world. That's the job of science, of course, is to find things that we can use. It's no good if these people are working away in their laboratories and universities and nothing comes out of it that's actually practical. That's their goal, to give us a hand, to show us something new. Sometimes it's very slow. Sometimes it's very fast. You know, the person who invented the wheel, they say about 3,000 years ago, I'm not sure whether it was a man or a woman, I'm prepared to guess it was a woman, who invented the wheel about 3,000 years ago, made a huge change to life. If you walk out onto Queen's Road, you can see it now. I mean, it must have been difficult using those square wheels before she came up with the round one. But there's an example of science, a scientific thought applying to real life very quickly, to the real world. Computer science, of course, is the great example. Every day there's something new, and we're all using it, we're enveloped in it. Sometimes it's slow. You know, genetics is a really interesting field. Genetics can do wonderful things for us, but it's slow. Every 5 years I go to a school reunion in Sydney. And a friend I sat next to in class at one stage is a professor in the field of genetics. His name is Ron. First person I seek out at the school reunion, I rush up to him and I say, Ron, how's it going? When am I going to get my hair back? When are you going to give me that injection that will give me the extra 50 years? And he shakes his head sadly and says, Bruce, it's going to be too late for us. So genetics is an example of where science is slow to get to us. Of course, computer science, no. Poor old Tom Watson, chairman of IBM in 1943, must have been embarrassed. I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. Now, we pretty much all carry one in our pocket or purse. And computer science is impacting us with changes all the time. And Steve Jobs and Apple are grabbing those scientific changes, putting them into an whatever, and away we go. So what's happening in brain science? Now, with computer science, there was a pretty big breakthrough in the early 90s with the Pentium processor. And we know the Pentium processor had a few incarnations and got better and better. And it was one of the big steps that brought computer science quickly forward. This machine, called an fMRI, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, has done something similar, in fact more so for brain science, because it's enabled the neuroscientists to see what's going on in our brain much, much more clearly than they ever could before. So what's happened is there's so much new information coming out in the last 10, 15 years. And what that means is you end up with people like the NeuroLeadership Institute, which is based in the US and Australia. And 4 years ago they held their first World Forum in Italy. They followed that up with one in Australia and then 2 in the United States. And the next one is going to be held in San Francisco in November. Now, at these forums, they're very different to the usual scientific forum, because what happens is the neuroscientists go there, sure. There's a neuroscientist from Dalian who's a regular at these events, and they share ideas, but they're sharing their ideas with the end user. Now, if you think about that, if a team of gynecologists go to Florida for a conference, it's full of gynecologists. There aren't any mothers there, there aren't any children there, it's just all gynecologists. But what happens here is you get the neuroscientists, you get the psychologists, you get the psychiatrists, you get the educators, you get the business people, all together, all doing presentations, a great big melting pot of ideas and new theories. So the advancements are coming thick and fast, and it's quite exciting. They're the countries that were represented at the last NeuroLeadership Forum. As I said, there were probably more people from China, but there was certainly a neuroscientist from Dalian University. They're the regions of the world. Not too many from North Africa, they're a bit busy at the moment, and Siberia, but most other developed places were covered. Okay, and what's coming out of this? What's coming out of this is the concept that simple changes in the way we use our brain can have a very, very big impact. That's for you, the people you're supporting, the people you're leading, the people you're training. Simple changes can have a very big impact. We've all seen representations like this of how the brain works. The brain works by cells connecting and by messages being transmitted across the connection. The important thing comes right at the end, where you actually see the connection working, and you'll see that little bubbles of chemicals pop across from one side to the other. When we have a thought, a memory, recall a memory, get some new information and think about it, a new cell connection is formed and chemicals cross over that connection. They're called neurotransmitters. One of the things about this type of representation is that they can't really give you a good representation of the brain, because we've got 100 billion brain cells and each one can make up to 10,000 connections. If you could really see what it looks like, it'd be like an electrician's nightmare. All these wires everywhere, you know. But it's a hugely powerful tool in so many ways and very, very weak in others, as we'll see. However, getting back to these neurotransmitters, we have all these chemicals floating around in the brain all the time. It's called a neurological wash. The composition of the chemicals, don't worry about the names, the composition of the chemicals changes with every thought we have, with everything that happens to us. If someone says something nice to us, the composition of the chemicals changes. If someone says something nasty, it changes. If we think something good, etc. So we're in this neurological wash where the chemicals floating around in our brain and our body are changing all the time. There's about 200 of them. It's a bit like this. It's a bit like a tug of war. You've got the team of chemicals that can make us feel great and help us achieve, the positive team. Happens to be the ladies in this case. I'll be very lady-friendly today, you'll notice. And there's also the negative team. The team of chemicals that make us feel awful, that diminish our performance. It's a battle, a constant tug of war. I'll just indulge myself in another analogy from rugby, which some of you might have some interest in. It's not really like a tug of war, it's a bit more like a rugby scrum, in that in a rugby scrum, while they're both pushing in different directions, every one of those 8 guys on this side and that side have a different job to do. They've got a specific task. And those chemicals in our brain, each has a specific task to do. But as a team, they push us in a positive or a negative direction. Okay, now here are some examples of the really important ones, and you will have heard of some of these. Let's say the positive team is led by dopamine. And there's a couple of others there. Dopamine is the chemical that makes us happy. If we have a dopamine overload in our brain, we're very, very happy and we're really firing. Oxytocin is the chemical that makes us feel comfortable. It's involved in childbirth. Serotonin is the chemical that makes us feel calm. Forget about all that. Let's just think about dopamine. We'll call dopamine the captain of the positive neurotransmitters. Dopamine, by the way, is the chemical that's released in your brain when you take cocaine. I haven't done that, truly. And I'm not going to ask if you have, but it's exactly the same. That's why, I mean, there's very little difference between the high you can get by something good or something happening or someone saying something good and the high you get from cocaine. The main difference is, with cocaine, it stops the chemical being reabsorbed quickly. Normally these chemicals are pushed out there, have an effect, and then they're reabsorbed. Cocaine slows the reabsorption. But if you think of dopamine, which is our favourite neurotransmitter, as you find out, as being similar to a high hit of cocaine in a way, it really shows you how impactful it is. On the other side of the coin, the negative ones, the ones pushing in the other direction, are things like cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. Now some of you will know that those, I mean, anything that's going on in our body that's natural, in other words, when we're not sick, anything that's going on in our body is positive. It's something that's evolved with us for thousands and thousands of years. These chemicals, cortisol, adrenaline and noradrenaline, have a job to do. In certain circumstances, they're very helpful for us. But if they stick around for a long time, they become very, very debilitating. Cortisol is the greatest example. Doctors give cortisol prescriptions for people who have got some sort of sickness that they want to fix quickly, such as asthma. But they always give it in very short doses, because the longer you're taking cortisol, the worse you feel. Cortisol is what we're full of when we're depressed, when we're under stress. So cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. When we're depressed, under stress, we're full of this type of chemical. Right? So wouldn't it be nice if we could control which of these two captains is winning? And we can. And wouldn't it be nice if we could also control that for the people we're trying to lead or trying to train? So neurotransmitters play a big role.